Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. My name is Christina. This is a reading for Aquarius rising, or if you just have Aquarius anywhere in your chart and you're needing a neutral energy to balance out masculine and feminine energies within yourself, then this reading is for you. So Aquarius, I've pulled your cards. We're going to get started with the bottom of the deck energies. So for the tarot, you have the Empress, Generosity, the Queen of Wands, which says vibrancy, and then the Four of Wands, which says celebration. So just generally, as your overall energy, I feel like this combination of cards is saying that you, Aquarius, have almost like your feminine energy is really solid, really strong, really sort of like feeling good or secure in sort of like your emotional state. Your more feminine energies, which are talking about sort of like receptivity, of like receiving insights, of nurturing perhaps self and others. And it feels like you have a lot to give in this regard, right? With the Six of Pentacles, the Generosity card, it's like you have a lot of very positive, strong and stable, with this Four of Wands as being sort of like a foundation, a strong foundation within your feminine energies. Regardless of what sign that is. And then you have here, just to emphasize that, with the beaver, which is all of this sort of like emotional solidity, right? Like very strong emotional state, because the beaver to me also talks about like home life, right? Like your home, the one who sort of takes care of how you're feeling and all that, making sure that everything is sort of secure, with the Empress as well. So I'm getting a lot of this energy, like very solid, stable, nurturing feminine energy within yourself. That's the overall energy of your reading. And I feel like that is sort of leading you into sort of more of the masculine energies, which is about taking action. I feel like right now, Aquarius, you're sort of seeing, or perhaps like strategizing a way forward, or like to take action based on sort of this solid foundation that you've established, is kind of how this is coming through today, especially with these two cards, the Joy Music and the Completion West. So again, this Joy Music is talking about, it's very sort of like a in the flow state, very feminine energy, kind of like just being is kind of how it feels, and having sort of like completed this aspect of this cycle or something like that. And it's like, because of this solid foundation that you've established for yourself in sort of the emotional, perhaps doesn't have to be emotional, but it does feel kind of like the non-physical, like receptivity kind of energy. It's allowing you to sort of discover the next step forward, is kind of how this is feeling. So we're going to start off with your current energy, which is kind of interesting because you do have all of this sort of like new beginnings energy with the Moth and the Bear. So the Bear talks about awakening. The Moth talks about having to sort of navigate through uncertain times, is kind of how this is feeling. So like sort of coming out of hibernation. That doesn't feel like you've been in hibernation. It feels more like you've established some sort of solid state of being, perhaps, right? Like just feeling very secure, but it's kind of like you're now having to leave that with the North expansion in order to pursue something else, right? It's like you're receiving the next sort of step forward, because now that you sort of filled your cup, right? You filled your cup. And now it's time to sort of like give back or take action or do something with that. And what's interesting here is that you have the Beginnings card, which is the Fool card. And then the Tower, which is interesting because, again, the Tower, to me, it's not so much like a typical Tower moment. It's more so because it's coming through with the Castle, talking about your foundation or your security or stability of some sort. And perhaps having to sacrifice a bit of that security or stability that you've recently just sort of been in order to start something new. there's a lot of energy in your reading today about like chess, because this was looking like the chess piece, the rook in the corner, which can only like the rooks are, I feel like, are the back row. I don't know if there's a difference at the major arcana, let's call it, for example, that is the most easily sacrificed, is kind of how I see it. I don't really play chess, and I haven't in years, but in my opinion, because the rook can only move like forward, backwards, side to side, they can only move in one direction, they're kind of easily sacrificed, is kind of how it's coming through today. There's something about here of like having to sacrifice or lose some aspect of your stability or security in order to start again. And I feel like that might be sort of an area of discomfort, because it is coming through with the shark, which is talking about an energy that is misunderstood in that it's more, it appears to be more scary or frightening than it actually is, right? Like there's a lot of fear around this sort of energy, but in reality it's not as sort of frightful, is kind of how it's coming through. And I feel like for you Aquarius with the fire ant, it's like, you know what it is that you need to do, but for some reason there's discomfort around there with the fire ant. This card recently came through in a different reading. I'll post it above in case it's relevant to you. Of like, there's a lot under the surface with this fire ant. Like if you think of like an ant colony, like all like you can't see all of the structure sort of underneath. It could also be talking about this combination of cards that perhaps you've been doing a lot of preparation already in order to take this next step, is kind of how it feels, Aquarius. Like that's sort of what the focus of that Aries reading, I think it was, where it's like doing a lot of like planning or strategizing, but not taking action, right? Because it's all under the surface, especially with this darkness moon. And that's also a very feminine energy too, of like sort of like receiving insight, of like allowing sort of plans to take form, perhaps listening to insight or receiving insight of some sort, or receiving guidance. All of that energy is sort of in here. However, there is sort of like, now it's time to bring this structure to the surface, and I feel like that's sort of where there's a little bit of discomfort. It's just how I'm gonna leave it, because it doesn't feel like you're like outright fear again with the shark. It's not like you're like, the shark can talk about fear, of course, but with this card it always sort of brings in the energy of like, if you don't take action, like the longer you let this shark energy sort of remain as it is, the more difficult it becomes later, is kind of how this is feeling, especially with the tower, right? That's sort of how the tower is characterized. When you don't make a change, when you know you need to make a change, that's when a tower moment happens. So I feel like Aquarius, you know that already. It's not saying that there is like sort of a really big tower moment, but it's kind of just like telling you that it is sort of time to take action in the direction that you've been preparing for, and it's kind of just like doing the thing. And what you have here next is vision and the sun, which is absolutely gorgeous, because this is what comes after the tower, right? It's like having to sacrifice some aspect of your security or stability in order to serve the bigger picture, is kind of what this is talking about, the Three of Wands. And I feel like with the sun, it is talking about success, but it's also talking about bringing whatever this structure or this planning, whatever has been under sort of the surface or hidden, or all of this sort of like making space for, right? I feel like you've been making space for some aspect to bring it into manifestation, basically. And it's time to sort of like bring that up, is kind of how it's feeling. Okay, and with this gravity groundedness card, which today was looking like pulling up a shipwreck from under like from the bottom of the seafloor, which is incredible, which is more so emphasizing like this energy, right? It's like it does take a lot of effort with the gravity groundedness. There is sort of like energy or focus or perhaps care needed in order to bring this structure up from out of the water, is kind of how this is feeling. But once you do it, once it's sort of out there, there's all of this sort of celebratory energy that's coming through. The difficult part might just be sort of getting the wheel to turn, as I with the next card here is Fortune, the Wheel of Fortune, coming after the Sun card, which again is talking about like, again with the shipwreck, right? There's something about like a new direction is kind of how this is feeling, but not in this case with the Tower, right? As I was saying with the Rook, it's like only moving in one direction, only being able to move like forward, backward, side to side. But with the Wheel here, it's kind of like you're able to sort of move in all directions is what this is talking about. There's more movement that's allowed, is kind of how this is feeling. If you, when you pull this thing up, or when you take this action that you know you're needing to take, is kind of how this is feeling. Okay, and then you have here the Elephant, which I love because it's kind of, well, it talks about destroying obstacles. Today it's more so talking about like a gift of some sort, or bringing your gift, perhaps bringing your gift to the surface is kind of how this is feeling. Because I sometimes see this card as like Prometheus. If you know that Greek myth Prometheus, of like he was a titan who gave fire to humans, right? The gift of fire, and so that allowed them to sort of evolve and all that. But again, I'm being reminded in that story Prometheus, like after he did that, he was sort of tied to a chain, or tied to a rock, right? With the eagle sort of eating out his liver. So there may be sort of this energy here, especially with the gravity groundedness as well, that you may be feeling, Aquarius. There may be sort of a reluctance to do this, because once you do it, you're locked in, is kind of how this is feeling. Like once you bring this thing to the surface, because right now it's sort of in the planning stages perhaps, but once you sort of like pull it out, like take the step, pull this shipwreck out of the ocean, it's kind of like you're locked into it. It's now yours. It belongs to you. You're responsible for it. You have to take care. Like there's a lot of sort of things that you need to now take care of in order for this to not be like pushed down into the ocean again, if that makes sense. However, I do want to say that it is going to be really positive. You have here the Creation Water, and then the Magician card, which is really fascinating because again, this water creation I have been talking about is like once you drain the water, some sort of structure emerges. So, but because this card is also talking about that, right? There's a similarity between these cards where I feel like for you, Aquarius, right, there may be a reluctance because it requires like a big commitment or a big investment of energy or resources of some sort, right? There's a reluctance to sort of pull the trigger, so to speak. But with the water creation, I feel like once you do it, it's like this is the energy that you're sort of, that there may be sort of an understanding misunderstanding. There may be a misunderstanding about this energy where you're seeing it as being, or anticipating that it is sort of like scarier, or there's something unfavorable about it, when in reality it's going to be much more sort of open and freeing with the Magician, because this is, the Magician naturally comes after the Fool energy, right? So I feel like there is sort of this beautiful kind of like Magician creation energy that happens when you do this, or when you take this action. And I feel like, Aquarius, you already know what that is. It's been building for a while, is kind of how it's feeling. Okay, so I'm going to move on to what's something that you need to know, Aquarius. which is such an interesting combination of cards here. You have here the tiger and the golden egg. So this is talking to me about like protecting your heart. I feel like there's some aspect here of like whatever this like new venture or new direction is, there's some aspect here where you're trying to protect your heart or protect something that's very close to you, or again with all of this sort of like feminine energy with the tiger, because right now you're in sort of like this the beaver empress kind of energy, which is all of this like gorgeous feminine energy, whereas the tiger's still feminine energy, but it's much more sort of like on the defensive is kind of how this feels. It's like if you're having to like leave your home, metaphorically, like leave or take a step away from some energy or a situation or place where you feel comfortable, and then having to sort of go out on the hunt, for example. It's like there is a shift there. So a place where you feel safe into a place where there's less of that. And so it's kind of more having to be on the defensive. And what this energy is being represented by with the tarot, which is so appropriate, is this the Knight of Pentacles, which is all of this sort of defense energy. It says reliability on the bottom. And the Queen of Swords. So it's like with the shield, right? Defending oneself, but also having to have the strength, perhaps, or the independence in order to take action with sword. So Aquarius, it's like this is something that you need to know, that there may be this feeling of like once you move out of this sort of like stable place that you've been in, this may be a result of that. In order to protect your heart, I want to say. So that could be coming through many different ways, depending on whatever it is that you are being asked to do. But with this golden egg as well, it's kind of like this may be some sort of like treasure or something like that, because it's coming through with like the shipwreck, right? It's like once you sort of pull this thing out of the water, I feel like there's going to be something in there for you to uncover as well, where it's like now all of a sudden you have to keep it safe. What I'm being reminded of is The Mandalorian, if you've watched that show, one of the Star Wars spin-off shows, where it's like he answered the call to do a job, right? Picked up this treasure, and it ended up being a much sort of bigger expansion, I want to say, right? Like with the treasure being Baby Yoda, right? It was like something that he thought was just a job, but ended up being a very strong bond or link, or it reshaped and re-identified who he was, basically, whatever this golden egg is. So there may be that kind of thing where it's like you take a simple step forward in a new direction, but in that process, there's something unexpected that is going to unfold in this, where it's like now there's some aspect that you need to protect, because as much as like in that story, The Mandalorian, it's like he was so independent, right? It's like he didn't need to like worry about anyone but himself. But in sort of discovering that the Baby Yoda character, it's like now all of a sudden he cares about something, right? He cares about something. And because he cares, there's this need to protect, right? Which is incredible. I feel like that's it's like a really positive direction for you to move into, Aquarius. It's like it is absolutely going to be some sort of new commitment that may be kind of like a lot at first, or overwhelming as well. With the tiger, it's kind of like activating all of your protective instincts is kind of how this is feeling. But what you have here next is the Life Breath card, which is absolutely gorgeous. I love this so much because it's talking about being freed from something that was constricting, right? It's like taking a really big gulp of air. all of this sort of coming up for air energy, right? Like bringing something up from the bottom of the seafloor so that it can have life. There's something like that. So it is sort of this like expansive adventure type of energy, but it will sort of activate your instincts to protect is kind of how this is feeling. Okay, and then next you have this elk card, which is interesting because I want to link it to this fire ant. So this fire ant, I was saying that there's like a lot under the surface with like the ant colony, all of these sort of tunnels under the surface that are not being perceived by you yet is kind of how this is feeling. But it's like, this is what's on the other side, right? If you think of this as like, this is the surface and then this elk is somehow underground, right? If you get what I'm saying. And so it's kind of like, because this elk I sort of see as being like a duty, right? It's like whatever step you're doing, like if you start sort of digging through this hole or digging through whatever, like wherever it is that your attention is being drawn to, even if it's sort of like an anxious response, right? It may be sort of an anxious response where like you're feeling discomfort and in having to look this way, it's kind of wanting you to do that more, right? To keep digging through whatever this is, because this is on the other side and there's some aspect of like duty or responsibility coming through with your reading today. But what you have here, which is incredible, is this 8 of Wands, the movement card, and the 6 of Swords transition. So it is sort of the direction or movement that you've been wanting. It's kind of how this is feeling. It is a positive move forward, even though right now it does feel kind of like causing anxiety or discomfort, right? Like the fire ant is not sort of a pleasant energy is how I'm gonna say. It's not like it's not, again, with more of the Mandalorian story coming in, whereas like he knew there was something off about the job, right? It's like he didn't have a lot of information. He just knew that this was the only sort of step forward that he could anticipate, or like that he could make for himself, because all the other options were kind of not great. But he knew there was something off about it, right? There's something about that where it's like you're feeling reluctant to move in this direction, even though it's the only sort of direction that seems plausible or seems realistic in some way, or seems like it would have the best outcome, even though there's still something off about it, right? It's kind of like an uncertainty energy, but it's trying to confirm that it is the right direction. You are meant to sort of move in this direction because there's a lot sort of under the surface for you to discover. And I feel like it's going to like activate some sort of element of like responsibility or duty or perhaps purpose is kind of how that's feeling. Okay. And then what you have here is the power volcanoes, which is of course emphasizing all of this energy, right? A lot of sort of movement is happening, right? From this sort of like small opening is kind of how this is feeling, right? Pulling something up from under the surface. And then what you have here next is the sunlight card, which I absolutely adore. So you have the sun twice, which is just confirming that yes, you should move in this direction. But it's kind of like whatever it is that you bring up from the surface, because I feel like it's, again, it's feeling like a shipwreck, right? Like something that's perhaps old and not, there's no life here, right? It's kind of like you're having to dig for buried treasure and not anticipating perhaps that there's, because something that I find interesting is, as much as I find like sort of archaeology and all that interesting, there's an element of like, it is past, right? There's no new life in that. That's sort of how this is feeling, right? Like there's no new life. It's something that's already sort of run its course kind of thing. But what this is talking about is that actually when you start digging, the thing that you're digging up has so much life is kind of how this is feeling. There's a lot of energy and vibrancy, again, with that Queen of Wands. There's a lot of energy and things to be discovered. And I see this Sunlight card as being like a very rare set of circumstances that leads to sort of an experience that is miraculous. So what it is that you are being asked to focus on, because right now it feels like you're reluctant to go in this way because it's kind of like, well, this thing is kind of already done. I would just be digging up something that's already like old and kind of like, not old necessarily. It's just more so like there's no life. I don't know how else to describe it. But it's actually something that's quite miraculous and has a lot of energy in it as well. And that's being emphasized here with the starfish and the whale, because at first it was coming through as like the elephant, which is a lot more sort of destructive, right? Something that's already been sort of destroyed. But all of this is actually quite life-giving. There's a lot of watery energy, which is talking about flow today. A lot of like flow and forward momentum. And then you have the King of Wands, which is talking about leadership. So what's interesting is I actually felt that this was another person as like coming through as like a partnership. It could also be more so like an upgrade, because you did have, or not an upgrade, I don't want to say upgrade, but you did have the Queen of Wands as the bottom of the deck, where this was more of like the receptivity of like receiving insights, planning, all of that. And then the King of Wands is like you actually taking action on this, on whatever this thing is, like being able to move forward. It was sort of coming through as sort of like a partner or like a partnership of some sort. There could be another person's energy as well, but especially because you have here with the Queen of Swords and the King of Wands, which are very opposite energies. But again, because it was coming through a lot with the chess imagery, where with these two cards at the end, you have the Ace of Pentacles and the Nine of Pentacles, which is wealth and culmination. So for here, if you're familiar with like chess pieces, the king is sort of like in terms of the movement of the king, the king can only move sort of one space at a time, right? They can only move one space in any direction around them. The queen can move much further. So this is how this combination of cards is actually playing out, where it's like there's an element here of perhaps there's somebody or some sort of partnership between the king and the queen, where it is kind of like a partnership, right? Both elements bringing something to the table in order to work together. But for you, Aquarius, it feels like you're the Queen of Swords, where it's like you are in more of this Nine of Pentacles, where you have the ability to move very like in all directions, right? The queen is the most powerful sort of piece in chess, where it's like you can move in any direction as far as you want. There's no sort of restrictions on the queen, whereas the king can only move so far, right? They can only move one space, but it is like there is sort of this center point is kind of how this Ace of Discs is coming through. They're almost like the center point where you move around. So I'm not sure if that's another person, or if it's like this is the thing that you're working on, or the project, or the thing that you've discovered. It's like, or it's this golden egg, right? The baby Yoda, the thing that you're protecting, where the thing that you're protecting, where it's like that thing can only move so far, but because of it's the thing that you're protecting as the queen, you can sort of move all around it. Like your movements are going to be dictated by whatever this thing is in the future. And I don't want to say that that's a negative thing. It's not coming through that way. Even though for you, Aquarius, your energy might be sort of resistant to that, is kind of how this is feeling, right? Resistant to sort of having your movements dictated by whatever this golden heart thing is, but it feels much more sort of expansive, and there is a lot of movement in it, is kind of how it's feeling. So there is movement, even though perhaps there's some aspect of like having to sacrifice, so to speak. I'm putting that in quotations because it doesn't feel that way. Sacrifice some aspect of your stability or foundation. It's just sort of feeling like there's maybe going to be a new foundation from which you will be moving or pivoting from. Okay, Aquarius, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to move to the extended. We're going to talk about what's something that you can focus on and where's an area of growth for you. The link for that is in the description box below. I do have other videos if you're interested in checking those out. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.